this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now, you call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year. You can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Why have we asked our contractor we found on Angie.com to be our kids' legal guardian? Because he took such good care when redoing our basement that we knew we could trust him to care for our kids, all 8 of them, should something happen to us.
Are you my dad now?
No, sorry, I do basements.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
Did you know that parents rank teaching financial literacy as the toughest life skill? That's where Greenlight comes in, the debit card and money app made for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and track spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn how to earn, save, and spend responsibly, while parents have peace of mind, knowing smart money habits are being built with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/iHeart. That's greenlight.com/iHeart.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. When I hear the term upcountry, I think of arguably one of the most beautiful places in the United States. That's the most northerly portion of the state of South Carolina. It's that welcome mat that brings you into Appalachia. And there's a little tiny town there called Travelers Rest. It's a beautiful place. I've been there many times throughout my life, and it's kind of like entering into this beautiful forested area, primeval, where you begin to see the land rise before you. It's beautiful streams, mountains. But for Edna Suttles, it turned out to be one of the most horrible locations that she could have ever been. Today, we're going to talk about the homicide, the murder of Edna Suttles. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Jackie Howard, the executive producer of Crime Stories with Nancy Grace, is joining me again today. Jackie, I know that you're from that area of the country up in Tennessee, and it is certainly beautiful. And I have to think that Edna probably thought it was rather gorgeous too. What do you think?
I do agree, Joe. And in fact, most of us who live in the mountains and are from that part of the area do consider it to be God's country. But unfortunately for Edna Suttles, someone else decided to make it no man's land. Edna Suttles and her 2014 Jeep Grand Cherokee disappeared from her home in Traveler's Rest, as you said, around August 27th, 2021. Her car was found, about a week later, September 3rd, also 2021, parked in a Best Western parking lot. And as investigators started looking and investigating this case, they found surveillance camera footage from the hotel parking lot. That helped them start a timeline of what happened to Edna Suttles. This may have been the last footage of her.
Let me tell you a little something about Edna that's absolutely fascinating. I found out about her life that I don't know if too many people know this. Edna is actually the first woman in the history of the state of South Carolina that was a bail bondsman. And she's 80 years old. So she's been around people, you can imagine, in the bail bonds world that are dangerous, perhaps very scary. And so you would think that her senses would be up and aware that maybe there was trouble at hand. But in Edna's case, apparently whoever it was that approached her, it didn't send off any alarms for her. She was essentially taken unawares. And when that happens, there's not necessarily an evidence of struggle. As investigators, you begin to think about, well, who in her immediate circle would have been there that would have put her at that level of comfort? Where she's not going to flee, she's not going to scream, she's not going to run away. You don't have reports from a parking lot somewhere that's saying that she's been snatched. We saw someone put her into a car and drive off with her. There's nothing to indicate that in Edna's disappearance. And so for me, you begin to look, as an investigator, you begin to look at the individuals that kind of inhabit her life and that are around her. Maybe not on a daily basis, but at least those she's familiar with.
Edna was seen with her car, but then Edna disappeared and she was reported missing. How was she reported missing? Did her family miss her, or was it her business that missed her?
Another thing about Edna that I find quite fascinating, she was well known in Traveler's Rest as an individual. Now, she's 80, okay, but she had kind of found a calling in life to serve the elderly community, those that are, kind of shut in, that don't have folks necessarily in their life that can come by and check on them and that sort of thing. And in Edna's case, there was an elderly person that she would look in on and come and sit with them and tend to them and take care of some of their basic needs. And when she didn't show up to that appointment, remember, that might be the only outside contact that individual has. Alarm bells went off for that individual. So the initial tip actually came from a person that Edna cared about, that was checking in on her on a regular basis. And when she didn't show up, that person alerted the police to say, listen, my friend didn't come by here. I haven't seen her and haven't heard from her, and I'm worried.
Edna's body was discovered in a wooded area. Tell me a little bit about what happened to her, and then we could talk about what investigators are going to need to recover from that scene to pinpoint who murdered Edna Suttles.
One of the fascinating things about this case that our listeners need to understand is that at any point in time, when a criminal begins to engage in any kind of criminal enterprise and they cross over state lines, that almost automatically, in many cases, makes a case a federal case at that point. I think a lot of people get confused over this, but when you have a person that is missing and you might have an indication that they are somewhere out of state, one of the default positions is the idea of kidnapping. Now, you can have kidnapping that occurs within state boundaries, but when you cross over a state line, if a perpetrator crosses over a state line with an individual that has in fact been kidnapped, that's one of the primary duties of the FBI. And so the FBI got involved in this case. And, when Edna's body was finally located, it wasn't in South Carolina or anywhere near Travelers Rest. It was out in a wooded area up in North Carolina. So when she was found eventually up there, she had, in fact, been buried. And her death just absolutely sent shockwaves through that community, through the lives of everybody that she touched. You can imagine if she's a bondsman where, people have to go and see her at the worst times of their life. She's made connections in that community, not to mention the aged that she had been touching their lives for some times as well. It creates something where people become scared really, really quickly. And that's when the police began to dig into this case, and they found something that was just absolutely ominous.
I bet I can tell you what that was, Joe. When the ME started the autopsy on Edna's remains, they found something, a drug, in her system. Am I right?
Well, to say that they found a drug in her system is an interesting way to put it. There were actually 3 drugs involved in Edna's death. And I don't know that I recall handling a case that's quite this sophisticated, if you will. There were actually several drugs, and this is something that we would refer to as a deadly cocktail. One drug was essentially a muscle relaxer. Another one was a narcotic pain reliever. And then I think probably the most significant thing here is a drug that's referred to as Ativan. It goes by a variety of different names, but Ativan specifically is used for anti-anxiety. And these had been crushed and mingled together and then placed into a cup of yogurt. Now, is that something that she would have ingested of her own volition? And as it turned out, it wasn't. It was actually a grouping of medication that was placed into a yogurt cup by a man named Daniel Printz, who actually administered that to her while she was restrained in his vehicle.
So when investigators were looking at the video, that is going to tie us back to the man you just mentioned, Daniel Printz. He was seen, the man you just mentioned, was seen in that surveillance video with Edna Suttles.
Yeah, he was. And actually, this is quite fascinating. Edna had arrived at a local Food Line grocery store. And there's actually videography from a surveillance camera that puts them in the same place at the same time. He's driving his vehicle, and she, of course, is driving this 2014 Jeep vehicle that she had. And you remember what I said in the beginning, where we begin to look at individuals that you feel comfortable with, that are in your immediate circle. In that video, there was actually interaction between the two. Daniel Printz can be seen waving at her on the video camera. Now, just think about that just for a second. It's not like some stranger, comes at you out of a dark alley somewhere. This is an individual that she knew, that it has been at least intimated over the course of this case and some associated cases that they did, in fact, have a relationship with one another and had known one another for a few years. Now, no one is really quite sure about the nature of that relationship, but it was such a relationship that it's just like if you come across your neighbor in a parking lot and they motion to you and you come on over and you begin to engage in conversation with them. She actually gets into the vehicle with Daniel Printz and leaves from that location. And she's essentially, at that point in time, she's in his control. Now, no one really knows what happened to her, but somehow, some way, she actually wound up in the trunk of his vehicle, restrained. And he, at that point in time, had administered this toxic cocktail to her, which consisted of these 3 very, very powerful drugs that would have brought about her death. The horror of this, I think that, probably on one level, if you're restrained and you're being forced to eat something, the most glaring thing is, well, what are you giving me? First off, why am I restrained? You're my friend. And then you begin to think about, well, why are you feeding me all of a sudden? And I can only imagine the horror that began to rise up in her. Because as these drugs would begin to kick in her system, every single one of these, just taken alone, has a level of lethality to it. But when they're combined, it begins to suppress the respiratory system. Breathing becomes labored. You become disoriented, essentially. And eventually, you'll go into a comatose state. And it's certainly enough to kill you.
As investigators moved in on Printz and executed warrants, they found Suttles' belongings on Printz's property. They found her purse. They found her Jeep keys hidden in a bee box on Printz's property. And in that bee box, they also found rope, zip ties, and rubber gloves. It was almost like they found the smorgasbord of evidence.
Yeah, when you begin to think about seeing something like this as an investigator, automatically, if you've got a missing person and you believe that they are connected to the individual that you're looking at, and you go out and you begin to put a profile essentially together of the individual that you're assessing at that point in time. And this automatically, you begin to think, why in the world would you retain these items? There are certain items that are contained in there that have no purpose. They serve no purpose whatsoever other than to perhaps reminisce, to think back upon. And, with serial killers in particular, one of the things that they will do is they will go back and they'll look at items, and they can be any number of items. And depending upon the particular serial killer that you're talking about over the years, they will focus in on specific items. And it's everything from clothing to toys sometimes to anything that reminds you of those events. And what I find fascinating about this is that he had hidden this inside of a bee box. Now, I got to tell you, I have a terrible fear of being stung. So if I'm searching out there on a piece of property and I'm executing a search warrant, you might have to call on another investigator to go look in the bee box, because I don't know if I'm going to be the person that you would want to task with that, because I'm terrified of being stung. But isn't that interesting that you could use a box like this that's associated with, growing bees and harvesting honey is what it comes down to. And you use that space in order to keep people away. And it's actually a place that you're storing things literally in plain sight. Now, isn't that fascinating? I don't know that I've ever come across a case where you have an individual that is taking these items and placing them in plain view like this for everybody in the world to see, if they have the intestinal fortitude to go open that box up. And when the police did, they found all of these items that were associated with Edna. And automatically, I can imagine fireworks are going off in their mind. They're thinking, what in the world is he doing retaining all of these items?
Now that we know that he is a serial killer, as you've intimated, you would have to imagine he's trying to save himself either a memento or wanting to use it again. But as the investigators dotted their I's and crossed their T's in this investigation, what I find absolutely fascinating is that the circle was drawn closed by the fact that investigators took a cadaver dog to Printz's property, and the cadaver dog alerted to human decomposition on Suttles' car and in Printz's wife's car, which is what they said he used to kidnap Suttles.
Yeah, isn't that something that after all of that time, these dogs can begin to pick up on scents like this? We think back to cases where cadaver dogs have been used in order to facilitate recovery of remains. And you think about, I often talk about how fascinated I am by what dogs are capable of doing. I often compare it to the visual spectrum of light, and our ability to see as human beings. And of course, dogs are renowned for eyesight too, but they also have kind of an olfactory spectrum where they can smell things that that we as humans, mere mortals, we don't have that ability. And when these dogs are trained specifically to do this, they can pick up on the slightest hint of any kind of decomposing material. Now, you have canines that are out there to actually track living human beings, but there are a group of dogs, cadaver dogs, that are utilized in order to look for decomposing remains. And because the body, as it begins to break down, gives off a specific scent. So does that necessarily mean that you have found the body at that point in time? No, it doesn't. But at least from a circumstantial standpoint, the investigators can say, and I would assume that the prosecutors, are chirping in on this as well, is that we begin to formulate something here. We know that this is not something that would be commonly accepted, that it's not a common occurrence to have the smell of human decomposition in a particular vehicle. That gives us an idea that at some point in time, a decomposing human remain had passed through this space. And what do you use a car for? Well, you use a car in order to get from point A to point B, and in this case, that's what occurred.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Hi, I'm Cindy Crawford, and I'm the founder of Meaningful Beauty. When Dr. Sabah and I decided to do a skincare line together, he said to me, we are going to give women meaningful beauty. And I said, that's exactly right. We want to give women meaningful beauty, which means each and every product is meaningful. It has a reason to exist. It's efficacious. You're going to get results. And then you just go out and live your life.
Meaningful Beauty. Confidence is beautiful. Learn more at meaningfulbeauty.com.
Why have we asked our contractor we found on Angie.com to be our kids' legal guardian? Because he took such good care when redoing our basement that we knew we could trust him to care for our kids, all 8 of them, should something happen to us.
Are you my dad now?
No, sorry, I do basements.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now. You call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
I've had people ask me over the course of my career, why'd you want to be an investigator? And sometimes one of the answers that I will give folks is that I'm nosy. I like to, go digging about and trying to find information out about these cases and these people's lives that I'm trying to determine what brought that life to a particular end. And In this case, I got to tell you, Jackie, boy, did the cops hit the jackpot when they began to investigate Edna's death. It's amazing what else they found at Daniel Printz's house.
And what the things that they found revealed is that Printz was indeed a serial killer. And Edna Suttles was not his first victim, just the first found. At Printz's home, investigators found pill bottles for cyclobenzapine, tramadol, and lorazepam that were prescribed to Nancy Rego. And Nancy had been missing out of Charlotte. So here we find more victims.
Yeah, and with the increased interest that we have in our country right now of people that are missing and unknown, I mean, it's amazing to me how focus has shifted now to people that, in my field, in medical legal death investigation, we came across a lot of unknowns. We had unknown skeletons, people that were never identified. We had unknown intact bodies. But now you begin to see the breadth and depth, I think, of how many tragedies there are out there in this country. And this poor woman had been missing since 2017. And when I began to read about her and read about the life that she had led, again, all these memories came flooding back to me of the pain that I'd seen in families' faces over the years where they didn't know what had happened to their loved one. And as tragic as it is, at least her family is actually given this bit of information now, and they can begin to move on. But what's significant now, I think probably for the police at this part of the investigation, is that they knew that they were dealing with something that was bigger than just a one-off event where this guy, Daniel Printz, who, by the way, is a felon, a convicted felon, had done time in Michigan previously for kidnapping. They knew that they were dealing with something that was far bigger than simply the death of Edna and her disappearance. Now they're looking at another death. They're looking at connectivity with a woman that has been missing since 2017. And I can imagine, because, this is kind of an isolated area of the country. Can you imagine you're in this rural location? You don't come across this every day, and all of a sudden, you're faced with the prospect that you're dealing with not just one, but two, maybe even more than that, deaths.
The problem that investigators had here is that even though they found the prescription bottles in Nancy Rego's name, they didn't know where Nancy Rego was. So they had to depend upon information that they could pull together and comments made by Printz himself.
Yeah, that's true. And, there's one narrative that he had, when the police are beginning to press Printz and trying to elicit information from him, because they know that they're onto something. They know that this guy didn't just run into Edna and he decided to kill her and take her off into an isolated area and bury her remains. They knew that there was something bigger there, and they really wanted to begin to probe this. And it's fascinating that in a couple of comments that he made, he deferred to this idea of euthanasia. And just think about that just for a second. He had actually at least implied that there were other people that he had kind of assisted, if you will, in their deaths to give them, I don't know, I guess relief from what he perceived as pain in this world or whatever. And at least that was the narrative that he was trying to sell to the police at that point in time. And can you imagine you're sitting there and and you're trying to elicit information from this guy, and he's telling you that, well, I view it that, yeah, I've been involved in some deaths, but they were friends. I aided them in their deaths. But suddenly, with Printz, when they began to kind of dig deeper relative to Edna's death, he, at that moment in time said he wanted an attorney, and he wouldn't tell them any more information without an attorney present. But what he did say, he says, I can bring you within 3 feet of Edna's body.
The issue here, though, Joe, is it's not just the death of Nancy Rego and where is her body, But her 88-year-old mother was also missing. We find that Printz had power of attorney over Rego's property. So Nancy Rego and her mother, it appears, died at the same time. Nancy Rego disappeared on the day that her mother was found in the home. And just like Edna Suttles, Dolores Sellers was killed by a combination of medications fed to her.
You know, Jackie, you think about this, and one of my fallback positions relative to serial killers, when you begin to kind of analyze their behavior and see what they do, what their purpose to do, how they go about doing it, they like to stay, we hear about geographic predispositions, they don't, go outside of their area. I hate to use the word hunt, but that's essentially the way they kind of frame this whole thing. But another thing that's very important when you begin to look at the way serial killers function is that many times they will stick with same methodologies. And we see in Edna where, she had medication that was applied to her, and apparently it led essentially to her death. Now, we have this 80-year-old woman who's found dead at home, and they were able to determine that she was given a lethal overdose, again, of a prescription cocktail. And, we think back to what Printz was saying in this interview that he was given to the police, when they were, trying to assess what was going on. And he used the term euthanasia. He talked about euthanizing a friend of his to speed them along the way, to kind of help them along the way, I don't know what his perception was. Lord knows, I don't know that I want to, but that's what he's telling the police. Now, that shows a pattern that he had chosen to do this. However, when you look at Miss Rego's cause of death, she was shot. So he deviates from a methodology at this point in time where he's utilizing a firearm. By the way, he was not supposed to be in possession of one because he's a convicted felon. And, that's one of the ways that the feds were able to hang charges on him initially, because he was found in possession of a firearm. And since he's previously been convicted of a felony and had done time up in Michigan, he's not supposed to possess one. And so that was another box that the feds and the investigators were able to tick in this case. But here's the really sad part of this, is that unlike her mother, Miss Rego, her body's never been found.
I was just going to ask you about that, Joe. How do we know that she was shot if her body was never found?
Well, that information is going to have to come from the perpetrator. And that goes to the level of skill that the police and the investigators, utilize. It's one thing, guys like me that deal in forensics and all those sorts of things, and people are wowed by what we can do at the scene and, documentation and collection of evidence and all that. But what's really fascinating is when you watch an interview and an interrogation to see what kind of information can be elicited from a subject that is willing to talk to you. And keep in mind, when we talk about Printz, one of the things that he had talked about was that he wasn't going to say anything else until he had a lawyer present. But when he did have a lawyer present, he essentially rolled over or confessed to everything. As a matter of fact, remember, he had said that I can put you within 3 feet of Edna's remains. So, our supposition here is that he essentially divulged this information to the investigators. So as police begin to, kind of work this out, they begin to see this pattern evolving with his behavior and how he had gone about essentially identifying the individuals he was going to kill.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Hi, I'm Cindy Crawford, and I'm the founder of Meaningful Beauty. When Dr. Sabah and I decided to do a skincare line together, he said to me, we are going to give women meaningful beauty. And I said, that's exactly right. We want to give women meaningful beauty, which means each and every product is meaningful. It has a reason to exist. It's efficacious. You're going to get results. And then you just go out and live your life.
Meaningful Beauty. Confidence is beautiful. Learn more at meaningfulbeauty.com.
Why have I asked my HVAC guy I found on Angie.com to change my grandpa's trachea tube? Because I was so amazed by how quickly he replaced our air ducts. I knew I could trust him to change Pop-Pop's tube while I was on vacation.
Make it quick, young man.
Aw, see? Pop-Pop trusts you.
I think we should call a doctor.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
Are you a fraud-paying American? It's a fact that 1 in 4 honest, hard-working, tax-paying Americans has been a victim of identity theft. With LifeLock Identity Theft Protection, though, if your identity is stolen, they fix it, guaranteed, and get you your money back. Last year, the IRS flagged over $16 billion in refunds for identity fraud. That's billions of dollars that could come from your salary, overtime, or second job. But this year, you don't need to stay a victim. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second for your personal information and alerts you to threats you could easily miss on your own. And if your information does fall into the wrong hands, only LifeLock has U.S.-based restoration specialists who are backed by the $1 Million Protection Package. Because this tax season, fraud-paying American is something no American should have to claim. Visit LifeLock.com/iHeart and save up to 40% your first year. That's 40% off at LifeLock.com/iHeart. Terms apply.
When you work serialized events, there's part of you as an investigator, you begin to think, will this ever end? The human side of you kicks in and you're hoping against hope that there won't be any more. But in the case of Daniel Printz, there did turn out to be another one, and that was a lady named Leigh Goodman. Jackie, I got to tell you, I'm at a loss. She had kind of a difficult life, but had succeeded in spite of a lot of pitfalls that she had experienced.
She did. She had been married multiple times. She had 4 children that she raised successfully in that they moved on to be successful themselves. But she still lived her life a little bit on the transient side, not in what we think most of the time when people talk about transients. She just liked to move around a lot. She was a licensed occupational therapist, and she did like to move around a lot. But unfortunately for her, she ran into Daniel Printz. In fact, she lived on his property for a while.
The relationship is kind of interesting and murky because, all of these people that Printz has associated with. He seems to, in some way, be able to kind of insert himself into their lives. As a matter of fact, we think back to how some of these deaths came about. They came about as a result of him essentially preparing a lethal cocktail of medication. He had gotten that medication from one of the victims and had held on to it. Now, you talk about purposed. He's taking medication that I think that could be sold on the street. You're talking about something like Ativan, that's an anti-anxiety medication, kind of like Xanax. That would have some value to it. No. He didn't use it himself. He didn't try to sell it on the street. He held on to it because it had utility. And he would purpose himself, at least from my perspective, to interject himself into these ladies' lives, every single one of them. And Leigh Goodman was no different. You begin to think about somebody that is a predator like Printz, and, the police, the FBI, as well as the locals and the state police, they identified him as a monster. They said that he was a predator, and he's always on the lookout. So you take someone like Miss Goodman, who had, like you had mentioned, Jackie, had lived kind of a transient life, had moved around a bit, had some instability, been through multiple marriages. She's going to have an area that can be exploited. She's looking for a place to live. Yeah, come on. I've got a nice place. I've got property. You can live here on my property. My wife won't mind. Come and stay here for a while. But that's what a predator does. They want to be able to take advantage of individuals that they know that they can have success against. Keep in mind, he's not going after some, 250-pound NFL linebacker here. He's going against people that are down their luck many times, or that are weakened by age or infirmity. He's inserting himself into their life. He's even looking for people. You look at Edna, people that do good in the community. She'd probably talk to anybody that's walking down the street. They just look for that point that they can kind of dig themselves into their lives and insert themselves. And, as it turned out, when the police began to talk to Daniel, he, actually admitted that he did, in fact, kill Leigh Goodman.
What sets these murders apart is the fact that it seems that Daniel Printz preys on older women. I don't want to say elderly, but the women that he seems to have preyed on were over 50. But one of the other things that stands out about him as a serial killer is the way he kills people. We know that he poisoned. We know that he shot. But we don't really know what he did to Leigh Goodman.
No, we don't. And guess what? We never will. They couldn't come up with a conclusion relative to how her life had ended. One of the more chilling aspects to this case is that the police put out the information that of the two women that to this date that are still missing, Daniel Printz disposed of their bodies by his own admission in a manner in which they can never be recovered. And just think about what that entails. If you're not capable of finding the bodies and they're in no condition to be examined, how are you ever going to make an exact determination? And that puts the police, the Attorney General, the FBI, it puts them in a position where they're having to be totally reliant upon the word of a monster, of a predator, Daniel Printz in this case. That's really all you have to go on. And I have to say, the police have played this very close to the vest, because this case actually did become a federal case, and the feds prosecuted this. It was actually tried, heard in the federal district court, and Daniel Printz wound up going to federal prison for the rest of his life, by the way. Not as much information has been released in these cases as, say, for instance, this had occurred at a state level where the state was the sole investigator. Many times the feds are not as likely to release information, the specifics about a case, as, say, the locals or the state police might be.
I think what frightens me the most about hearing the details of all of these investigations is the knowledge that this is probably not the only murders he's ever committed. It's just the ones that we know about.
You're absolutely right. When you consider the fact that Daniel Printz has done time in the Michigan State Penitentiary for kidnapping, that was in Michigan. These cases took place in South Carolina and North Carolina. Where's he been in the interim? What has occurred? And also the fact that he was willing to give up specific information about these 4 women that we're covering today really gives you pause. You think, you know, where else has he been? Who else has he impacted along the way? What other families are missing people that might be associated with this man? You know, because he's not like a stranger that hides in the darkness and then steps out suddenly like some kind of monster in a movie. He's a guy that warms up to you. He's a guy that becomes your friend. He's a guy that you give power of attorney to. He's a guy that takes your SSI checks. And in the end, he's a guy that absolutely destroys you. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Running my small business was like playing basketball 5-on-1, and I was the one. Now, QuickBooks gives me access to a team of AI agents and trusted experts for the assists I need. Nothing but net.
Outdo it with Intuit QuickBooks. Feature availability varies by product.
Are you a fraud-paying American? 1 in 4 tax-paying Americans has been a victim of identity fraud. With LifeLock, if your identity is stolen, they fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Last year, billions in refunds were stolen. Could be from your salary, overtime, or second job. Gone. But this year, you don't need to stay a victim, because this tax season, fraud-paying American is something no American should have to claim. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/iHeart. Terms apply.
It never happens at a good time. The pipe bursts at midnight. The heater quits on the coldest night. Suddenly, you're overwhelmed. That's when HomeServe is here. For $4.99 a month, you're never alone. Just call their 24/7 hotline and a local pro is on the way. Trusted by millions, HomeServe delivers peace of mind when you need it most. For plans starting at just $4.99 a month, go to HomeServe.com. That's HomeServe.com. Not available everywhere. Most plans range between $4.99 to $11.99 a month your first year. Terms apply on covered repairs.
Picture chicken nuggets in your head. Okay, now forget them. Because Taco Bell's crispy chicken nuggets are here. And they're nothing like the nuggets you know. All white meat chicken, coated in tortilla chips for that signature Taco Bell crunch. A nugget like that calls for a sauce that can keep up. Introducing Hidden Valley Diablo Ranch. The iconic ranch you love, fired up with Taco Bell Diablo sauce. Bold meets bolder. Ranch meets Diablo, and it works. Crispy chicken nuggets from Taco Bell, a brand new classic. At participating U.S. Taco Bell locations for a limited time only, while supplies last.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.